Disclaimer: it's inspired by reality, shaped by imagination.
It was supposed to be a warm conversation about family values, but when Cher sat down on The View, things spiraled into one of the most heated clashes daytime TV has ever seen. The topic? Whether multi-generational households, grandparents, parents, and kids all living under one roof should once again become the norm in America. Joy Behar argued it was unrealistic, a relic of the past that would only create more conflict in modern families. But Cher, never one to hold back, shot back that families today have lost their sense of duty, respect, and unity. The audience was instantly divided. Some cheered for Cher's passionate defense of tradition, while others backed Joy's sharp insistence that independence and boundaries are what make modern families thrive. What started as a thoughtful exchange quickly unraveled into fiery interruptions, emotional stories, and at one point, a moment so intense that Cher herself nearly walked off the set before producers stepped in. This wasn't just a debate about households, it became a cultural showdown about how America sees family, responsibility, and respect across generations. And by the time it ended, the viral moment had already cemented itself as one of the most talked about clashes in The View. The lights dimmed slightly as The View's signature theme music played, and the camera panned across the cheering studio audience. Whoopi Goldberg, at the center of the table, smiled warmly as she welcomed viewers to another lively morning. Beside her, Joy Behar leaned forward in her seat, already wearing that knowing grin she often flashed before a debate. Sunny Houston and Ana Navarro sat poised with their notes, but today all eyes were on the empty guest chair waiting at the end of the table. "Please welcome the one and only Cher," Whoopi announced. The crowd erupted. The legendary singer, dressed in a flowing black outfit with silver accents that shimmered under the studio lights, strode onto the stage with the kind of effortless confidence only Cher could carry. She waved, blowing a kiss to the cheering fans, before sliding gracefully into her chair. "Good morning, ladies," Cher said, her voice smooth but playful. "Thanks for having me." Joy leaned forward in her seat. "Oh, you know we wouldn't miss this. We're talking family today, and I have a feeling you've got a lot to say." The audience chuckled, sensing the spark already. Whoopi wasted no time. "So the question we're posing today is, should multi-generational households, grandparents, parents, kids, sometimes even cousins, all living under one roof, become the norm again in America? We've seen it in other cultures, but is it realistic for us here?" Sunny jumped in first, her tone measured. "It's happening more than people think. With the cost of housing rising and so many families stretched thin, it's not just cultural, it's practical. Families leaning on each other is how we survive tough times." The audience nodded, a few clapping softly. Cher tilted her head, listening intently. "That's right. Look, I grew up in a time when family was everything. You didn't question it. Your grandmother, your uncle, whoever needed help, you made space. Families weren't perfect, but you figured it out because that's what love and loyalty meant. And honestly, I think we've lost a lot of that in America today." The crowd broke into applause, with a few whistles. Cher raised her hands in acknowledgement, her bracelets jingling as she gestured. Joy, however, wasn't impressed. "Okay, but hold on a second," she said, her tone sharp but laced with humor. "It's not all roses. Multi-generational households sound great until you've got your mother-in-law telling you how to raise your kids or your uncle still living in the basement at 60. People need independence. Boundaries are healthy." A murmur of laughter rippled through the audience, though some booed softly. Cher's eyes narrowed slightly, though she kept a smile. "Joy, with all due respect, that sounds like the selfish way out. Sure, it's easier to say everyone live your own life, but when did we decide easy was better than right? When your parents get old, are you just going to drop them off somewhere because you want boundaries?" The audience gasped, then burst into applause. Sunny raised her eyebrows, while Anna covered her mouth, hiding a grin. Joy leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. "Oh, don't put words in my mouth, Cher. I'm not talking about abandoning anyone. I'm talking about sanity. Families can love each other without living on top of each other. There's a reason people move out when they're grown. Whoopi raised her hands, trying to keep it balanced. All right, let's keep it cool. This is just the beginning, and I can already tell it's going to be one of those mornings. Cher chuckled, though the edge in her tone lingered. I get that, Whoopi, but let me tell you something. When I see families splintered into tiny pieces, with kids growing up barely knowing their grandparents, it breaks my heart. Elders have wisdom. They carry history. And now, too many of them are sitting alone in homes while their families are out there pretending independence is more important than connection. The crowd clapped again, some shouting yes from the back rows. Joy rolled her eyes dramatically, earning laughter. Oh, come on, Cher. You're romanticizing it. You know very well that living with your parents at 40 is not the dream. It creates tension. It creates resentment. And let's be honest, not every elder is a fountain of wisdom. Sometimes they're just cranky old people making your life harder. The audience reacted with mixed gasps and chuckles. Sonny leaned forward. I think we have to be careful here. There's truth in both sides. Yes, multi-generational households can be stressful, but research shows that children benefit when grandparents are present. They get more emotional support, cultural identity, and stability. Cher nodded vigorously. Exactly. Thank you, Sonny. Joy shot back with a grin. And research also shows higher stress levels when too many adults are under one roof. Don't cherry pick. The tension rose as the audience grew louder, voices overlapping, some clapping for Joy, others for Cher. The studio's energy felt electric, as though everyone sensed the debate was only getting started. Anna finally chimed in. You know what this really shows? America is split. Half the people are nostalgic for family bonds, the other half terrified of their in-laws moving in. That's why this conversation is so charged. The audience laughed, though nervously. Whoopi shook her head, smiling. And we've only just started. She glanced at Cher and Joy, who were already staring each other down across the table. Something tells me we're not getting out of this without a fight. The camera panned over the audience, some clapping, some whispering to their neighbors, before cutting back to the heated table. Sparks had flown, and everyone knew the fire was only going to get hotter. The applause had barely died down when Joy leaned forward again, clearly unwilling to let Cher have the last word. Her voice cut through the chatter like a knife. You talk about elders being left alone, Cher. But let's be real. Not every family can handle that dynamic. You put 3 generations under one roof, and suddenly you've got turf wars over the TV remote, fights about parenting styles, and no privacy for anybody. That's not family bonding. That's chaos. The audience chuckled, but it wasn't the kind of laugh that eased tension. It was sharp, nervous, like people knew a fight was brewing. Cher snapped her fingers for emphasis. Chaos? Please. Families have been messy since the dawn of time, Joy. That's not an excuse to abandon the idea. You want privacy? Go to your room. But don't tell me families can't coexist. What's really happening is people don't want to sacrifice anymore. Everyone's obsessed with convenience. The crowd erupted into applause again, many standing. Cher's passion rang in her voice, her bracelets clinking as she gestured broadly. Joy, rolling her eyes, quipped back, Oh, give me a break. You act like people who live apart don't care about each other. That's ridiculous. I visit my family, I support them, but I don't want to share a bathroom with them. That doesn't make me selfish. It makes me sane. Laughter rolled across the studio, but this time, Cher didn't join in. Her jaw tightened. Sanity? Cher repeated. No, Joy. It makes you comfortable. And comfort has become the excuse for everything. Do you know how many cultures around the world thrive because generations stick together? They don't complain about bathrooms. They build stronger communities. Sonny jumped in, sensing the rising heat. There's something important here. In Latino families, multi-generational living is very common.
I grew up with my grandmother in the house, and it wasn't always easy, but it was invaluable. She grounded us." Cher snapped her fingers and pointed at Sonny. "Yes, that's exactly what I mean. You learn patience, humility, and responsibility. Living with elders teaches you to think beyond yourself." Joy smirked. "Oh, it teaches you to resent your relatives for constantly being in your business. Come on, Sonny. You're making it sound idyllic, but I bet there were plenty of moments when you just wanted your own space." Sonny's face tightened. "Sure, but that doesn't erase the value. Growth isn't supposed to be comfortable all the time, Joy." The audience clapped loudly for Sonny, and Cher mouthed "thank you" in her direction. Anna jumped in with a half smile. "Look, I think both of you are missing the bigger point. It's not just about choice, it's about economics. Some families don't have the option. They have to live together because they can't afford anything else. So arguing whether it should be the norm is almost irrelevant. For millions, it already is." The crowd clapped, appreciating Anna's practical tone. But Cher leaned in again, unwilling to let go of her central point. "Exactly, Anna, but why do we talk about it like it's a failure? Why don't we celebrate it? Families pooling resources, leaning on each other, that's strength. That's survival. Instead, we call it overcrowding, like it's shameful." Joy shot back instantly. "Because sometimes it is shameful, Cher. Sometimes it means an adult child won't grow up. Sometimes it means you're stuck with people who drive you crazy. You're romanticizing something that isn't sustainable for everyone." The crowd gasped at Joy's bluntness. A man in the audience shouted, "That's rude." Cher's face hardened, her voice rising. "You know what's not sustainable? Shoving our elders into nursing homes because they're inconvenient. That's what's shameful. America has turned its back on family." The room broke into cheers and boos, the audience visibly split. Whoopi raised her hands, trying to mediate. Okay, let's not make this personal." But Joy was already shaking her head. "I'm not making it personal, Whoopi. I'm making it realistic. You put 3 generations under one roof, and sooner or later someone explodes. Families need space to breathe." Cher leaned in, her voice sharp now. "Families need loyalty more than they need space, Joy, and maybe that's what we've lost. Loyalty. You can't just pick and choose when family matters." The crowd gasped, a mix of clapping and murmuring. The tension in the studio was palpable, almost tangible. Sonny jumped in again, her voice firm but calm. "But isn't there a balance? Respecting elders doesn't have to mean losing independence. The real question is whether America even wants to find that balance." Anna sighed. "The real question is whether America can afford not to. With housing prices and elder care costs, this debate isn't going away." Cher shook her head, refusing to let Joy off the hook. "Joy, answer me this. If your mother was sick and couldn't afford help, would you take her in?" The audience gasped, leaning forward. The tension was unbearable. Joy blinked, caught off guard, then snapped back. "Of course I would. Don't twist this. Taking care of your family when they need it is one thing. But turning multi-generational households into some kind of mandate, that's another. You can't force it." The crowd erupted, half cheering for Joy's defiance, half applauding Cher's conviction. Cher's voice dropped lower, but it carried across the studio. "No one's forcing anything, Joy, but we should be asking ourselves why we resist it so hard, why we treat our own blood like a burden instead of a blessing." The crowd gasped again, some clapping furiously, others shaking their heads. The camera panned across the co-hosts, all wide-eyed, sensing the debate was veering into explosive territory. The fire between Joy and Cher wasn't just sparks, it was a full flame, and the studio was heating up fast. The energy in the studio had reached a fever pitch, and Whoopi's attempts at keeping things balanced were barely holding the room together. The camera zoomed in on Cher, her eyes glistening, not with anger alone, but with something deeper. She exhaled slowly, her voice softening as the audience leaned in. You know why I care so much about this, Joy? Because I lived it. When I was a little girl, after my parents split, my mother couldn't afford to keep a roof over our heads on her own. We didn't have money. We didn't have options. So we lived with my grandparents. 4 generations, all crammed into one small house. And yes, it was loud. Yes, it was cramped. But it saved us. My grandmother kept me steady when everything else was falling apart. She was the one who told me I could be something when I felt like I was nothing. Her voice cracked slightly. The audience went silent, hanging on every word. She was there when I came home from school crying. She was there when my mother was too exhausted to cook, when we barely had enough. She held it all together. If it weren't for her, I don't know if I'd be sitting here today. So when I hear people talk about grandparents being a burden or multi-generational living being chaos, I hear people throwing away the very people who made them who they are. The crowd erupted into thunderous applause. Some audience members stood, clapping fiercely. Cher sat straighter, her voice regaining strength. It wasn't easy, but it was love. And I will never, ever apologize for believing that families belong together. Joy inhaled sharply, visibly touched but unwilling to yield. She leaned forward, her tone firm. Cher, that's a beautiful story, and I respect what your grandmother did. But your experience doesn't erase the fact that for many people, it isn't beautiful. For every story like yours, there are others where living together tears families apart. Siblings don't speak for years. Parents and children resent each other. You make it sound like love conquers all, but sometimes love needs space to survive. The audience gave a mixed reaction, clapping for Joy's practicality, but with murmurs of dissent. Cher shook her head. Space is a luxury, Joy. Families in the real world don't always have that option. We're so quick to defend independence, but we forget that interdependence is what gets people through life. Sunny interjected, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. My grandmother was the backbone of our home, too. She lived with us until the day she passed. Was it stressful? Of course it was, but it gave me a foundation I wouldn't trade for the world. And I think about how many kids today don't even know their grandparents. That's a loss you can't measure. The crowd clapped again, some people shouting, "That's right." Joy's eyes darted between Sunny and Cher, and she let out a sharp laugh. So what, now I'm the villain because I think families need boundaries? Please. I'm not against grandparents being in children's lives. I'm against turning one family model into some moral standard we're all supposed to follow. It's not realistic. Cher's expression hardened. It's not about making it a rule, Joy. It's about values, about asking ourselves what kind of society we're building. Do we want one where we wall ourselves off from the people who raised us, or do we want one where we recognize the power of family, messy, complicated, but vital? Her words landed heavily. The audience clapped again, some people visibly emotional. One woman in the front row wiped away tears. Whoopi finally spoke, her tone measured. You're both right in your own way. Cher's talking about the heart of family, Joy's talking about the reality of living together. The trouble is, this country is caught in the middle between nostalgia and practicality. But Cher wasn't finished. She leaned in, her voice trembling slightly. I watched my grandmother fade away in the same house she helped hold together, surrounded by her children, her grandchildren, all of us there. And I thought, that's the way it's supposed to be. You don't spend your life building a family just to die alone. You deserve to be surrounded by love. The audience gasped, then burst into applause so loud the hosts had to wait for it to die down. Some shouted Cher's name, others stood in a wave of agreement. Joy, her arms crossed now, shook her head. You're pulling on heartstrings, Cher, but life isn't a movie. Not everyone gets that ending. Not every family wants that ending. And pretending like one size fits all is unfair. The divide in the room was visible. Half the audience clapped loudly for Cher. The other half nodded firmly at Joy's pragmatism. The tension between the two women crackled across the table like static. Cher leaned back in her chair, her voice steady but sharp. Maybe it's not one size fits all, but maybe, just maybe, it should be the size we reach for, instead of shrugging our shoulders and saying, oh well, it's too hard. Families don't survive on convenience. They survive on commitment. The crowd roared, and Joy's lips tightened into a thin line. At that moment, the emotional stakes had shifted. This was no longer a light debate. It had become a raw, personal showdown about what it means to honor those who came before us, and whether modern families were willing to pay the price of togetherness. The table was set for an explosion.
The table was already smoldering when the segment returned from its mid-show break, but by now it was about to ignite into something much more combustible. Joy Behar, leaning forward in her chair with her sharp, unflinching gaze, had had enough of Cher's sweeping declarations. Let me ask you something, Cher. Do you really think the solution to every problem in America is stuffing 3 generations under one roof like sardines? It's 2025, not 1925. Cher blinked, then leaned forward herself. Her voice carried a surprising calm, but beneath it was pure steel. No, Joy, I think the solution is remembering who we are and not throwing away the people who raised us just because it's more convenient. Maybe that's uncomfortable for you to hear, but I'm not going to sugarcoat it. The audience let out a collective "ooh," sensing the shift. The playful sparring was gone. This was now personal, emotional, and raw. Joy didn't back down. Don't patronize me, Cher. I come from an immigrant family that fought tooth and nail to make it in this country. We didn't need to drag our grandparents into our adult lives to prove that we cared for them. Respect is not about living arrangements. Respect is how you treat people, not whether you share a bathroom. That line drew a wave of applause from half of the audience. Cher's jaw tightened. Her glittering presence suddenly darkened into something fiery. She raised a finger, her tone booming with conviction. No, Joy, respect is not just words, it's actions. Actions are feeding your elders when they can't feed themselves. Actions are making space in your life when they no longer can drive or cook or even climb the stairs. You want to talk about dignity? What's dignified about leaving them to rot in a facility because it's easier for the kids? Gasps broke out across the studio. Some audience members cheered, others shook their heads. The divide was tangible. Joy, visibly irked, rolled her eyes and muttered, "Oh, please," loud enough for the cameras to catch. That please was a spark to Cher's gasoline. She leaned forward, her voice climbing. You sit here on national television telling people that tradition doesn't matter, that family doesn't matter unless it's convenient. Well, let me tell you something. Convenience is killing us. It's killing community. It's killing compassion. And it's killing respect. And if you think that's progress, Joy, then I don't know what world you're living in. Joy's face turned red. She clapped her hands together and shouted back, I live in the real world, Cher, where people are already working 2 jobs to pay rent, where not everyone can afford to add another person under their roof. You can sing all the ballads you want about family, but you don't live like the average person. You've got mansions and staff. Don't lecture the working class on sacrifice. The audience erupted, half cheering, half booing. Whoopi put her hands up, trying to calm the chaos. All right, everybody breathe. We're gonna... But Cher cut her off, her voice slicing through the noise. Don't dismiss me because I have money, Joy. That's a cop-out. I know what struggle is. I know what it's like to come from nothing. My mother taught me to fight and to care, and that doesn't go away because I can now afford a bigger house. If anything, it gives me the chance to lead by example. What's stopping you? What's stopping anyone in this country from choosing compassion?
Joy snapped back. "What's stopping us is reality, Cher. You can't guilt people into turning their homes into retirement centers. That's not compassion. That's coercion." For a moment, the entire studio seemed to hang in silence, waiting for Cher's response. She straightened her posture, looked Joy dead in the eye, and said with chilling clarity, "Then reality is the problem, not me." The line landed like a hammer. The audience gasped, some applauding wildly, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Whoopi tried to intervene once more, but the studio had already tipped past the point of civility. The clash had reached its breaking point, and no one, not even Whoopi, could reel it back. Viewers at home were left stunned as the live feed cut abruptly to commercial, the tension unresolved, the debate still burning in the air.
When the cameras returned from commercial, the energy in the studio was unlike anything The View had seen in months. The audience wasn't just buzzing, they were divided, murmuring, and visibly shaken by what had just happened. Some clutched their phones, already tapping out tweets and posts. Others sat with arms folded, eyes glued to the stage, waiting to see how this would end. Whoopi, the eternal moderator, leaned in with her hands spread across the table. "Okay," she said with a steady but firm tone, "we all need to take a breath here. We're talking about family, and it's a sensitive subject. I think everybody in this room feels that." But the tension still clung like smoke. Cher sat upright, her jaw firm, her eyes locked on the audience as if daring them to disagree. Joy, meanwhile, leaned back in her chair with arms crossed, lips pursed in a way that suggested she was not about to apologize or back down. Anna Navarro, who had been quieter during the blow-up, finally stepped in. "Look, I grew up in a Cuban household where 3 generations did live together. My abuela was part of my everyday life. But I'll tell you this, it wasn't easy. It wasn't some glamorous fairy tale. It was hard. There were arguments. There were sacrifices. But yes, there was also love. What I think we need to recognize is that every family's reality looks different." That line drew applause. It was the first attempt to bridge the canyon that had split wide open. Sunny, who had stayed mostly silent during the explosion, added her perspective softly. "I cared for my parents, and yes, it was exhausting, but I'd do it again. I just think we can't pretend it's possible for everyone. It's not always about a lack of compassion. It's about survival." Cher turned to Sunny, her face softening for the first time all segment. "I don't disagree with that," she admitted. "I know not every family has the resources, but what I can't stand, what gets me fired up, is when we act like independence is more important than connection. We've normalized leaving people behind, and I'll never be okay with that." The sincerity in her voice pulled the audience back toward her. Applause swelled. But Joy quickly cut in, unwilling to let the moment pass without her stamp. "Cher, nobody here is saying abandon your parents. Nobody. What I'm saying, and I think what millions at home are saying, is that you can't guilt people into thinking they're failures if they can't make a multi-generational household work. You don't know the stress of trying to cram 4 people in a 2-bedroom apartment." That line earned its own round of cheers. For the first time, it became clear that this wasn't a room leaning one way or another. The crowd was split right down the middle. Whoopi finally sighed. "You know what? Maybe that's the real takeaway. Some folks want tradition. Some folks want independence. And maybe, just maybe, respect for our elders doesn't have to look the same in every family." It was a rare moment of calm. Cher nodded slowly, as though conceding that Whoopi's middle ground had some merit. But Joy, never one to leave without a parting shot, added with her trademark smirk, "All I know is if my mother-in-law moved in with me, she'd outlive us all just out of spite." The audience burst into laughter, some clapping at the comic relief. Even Cher cracked the faintest smile, though she quickly regained her poise. "You might laugh, Joy, but some of us believe that's exactly the kind of challenge worth facing." The cameras caught the look between them. Two women locked in philosophical combat, unwilling to give an inch, yet undeniably commanding the room together. As the segment wound down, Whoopi turned to the camera with that veteran steadiness. This conversation isn't ending here. It's happening in your homes, in your communities. How do we honor the people who raised us? That's the question. And whether you agree with Joy, with Cher, or with both in different ways, I think what we all want is to make sure our elders know they matter. The music swelled, signaling the close of the segment. Cher leaned back, still visibly tense, but resolute, while Joy adjusted her papers, defiant as ever. The audience stood, clapping loudly, some for Joy, some for Cher, and some simply for the sheer spectacle they had just witnessed. By the time the show cut to its next commercial, hashtags were already trending. Hashtag Team Cher, hashtag Team Joy, hashtag Elder Respect, and hashtag The View Meltdown. Clips of Cher's "Convenience is killing us" line were spreading like wildfire, while Joy's sharp rebuttal about reality was being praised in equal measure. In the days that followed, think pieces poured out. Opinion columns debated whether multi-generational households were a relic of the past or a necessary return to community. Social media feeds lit up with personal stories. People sharing the joys and struggles of caring for aging parents. Others defending the independence they felt they had earned. But one thing was undeniable. Cher's clash with Joy Behar had touched a nerve. What started as a heated TV segment had spilled into living rooms across America. It wasn't just about two women arguing. It was about values, about sacrifice, about what it means to grow old in a culture that worships independence. As one viral comment put it, this wasn't just The View, this was America arguing with itself. And with that, the outro closed not with resolution, but with a lingering question. What do we owe the people who made us who we are?